Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about Alzheimer's disease, which is a dreadful, dreadful, degrading disease that robs an individual of who they are, of their memory, and of the people they love. You know, years ago, you didn't hear too much about the idea of what would become, Alzheimer's. We did have dementia. And people did suffer it from days past. And if you go back in history, you'll see people talking about individuals. You know, the old saying is dying like a tree from the top down. That was a common statement years ago. One of the individuals historically, and going through letters of John Adams, which I got to read a good deal of his letters, which are fascinating reading. He talked in the 18 teens when he was about 80 years of age and talking about how happy he was that he had his phenomenal memory and his ability to read and his ability to think and reason, and that he was not like his cousin, Samuel Adams, who he mentioned sadly died like a tree, slowly from the top down. And in the last days and years of Samuel Adams' life, he was suffering from what you might call possibly an Alzheimer's type situation until he finally died. Of course, today, Sam Adams is not remembered much in the way of being a revolutionary. We kind of think of him for beer. There's a company, of course, called Sam Adams Beer. And I do remember being in Boston, as a slight aside, being right across the street where Sam Adams was buried, and raising my glass of Sam Adams in a toast to the individual for which that beer was named. That was in Boston, by the way. But the interesting thing is, I must say that Alzheimer's, dementia, has been progressively growing in size. Now, I have been told by researchers, and I have dear friends who are brain researchers, and they say it's because we're living too long. Now, I am not educated in the sciences. I'm not educated in the brain. But I would like to offer observations for which I see. And that is, it may be a combination of technology and research which has brought Alzheimer's disease to the forefront. First off, if I may say, technology has totally changed the way we think. Technology has totally changed the way we use our memories. Technology has totally changed the way we live our lives. Now, we are ancient beings. You know, the Homo sapien that we are has existed for quite a few 100,000 years. And of course, we mixed, with various other types of humans. And the strongest species kind of survived. And we had to rely on our brains. We had to rely on our logic. We had to rely on our cunning. And we had to rely on our memory. Because that's all we had. Now, we eventually could read books starting in the 15th century. Before that time, it was purely oral. And as time went on, we created libraries and people studied. But that reading, that studying, would be retained in the brain because we needed it once again. As technology develops further and we reach the 20th century, everything changes. First off, radio. Secondarily, television. And more recently, in the latter 20th century, the computer and the cell phone. The last two in this listing of the late 20th century are the major culprits as far as I'm concerned. No. Yes, indeed, radio changed the way we thought a little bit. But the interesting thing about radio was this. It encouraged imagination. It encouraged the mind to work because you were listening, and in your brain would be created amazing images. A great example of this on radio was on the Jack Benny radio program, where he had his vault. Now, you never saw his vault. You only heard it. And therefore, as you listened to 5 minutes of working his way into where his money was, your mind was exploding with images and thoughts and ideas, and it was great. Excuse me. Once the man-eating beast, as Jack Benny called it, television came in, all of that was lost. Now you could see everything. Now your imagination could go on a coffee break. And you would watch TV, and that was more passive, especially for the brain. There were bits where you could use the mind some. Then we came to the computer. And the computer was a great tool, a useful tool. Cell phones were useful tools. And then in the end of the 20th century, out came the internet. And the internet is a massive storehouse of information. I remember the first time I went on the internet. It was in 1999. And I figured something somewhat obscure, not too obscure. I typed in the name William McKinley. I thought that would be a little obscure, but not that obscure. And there were lots of bits of information. I was pretty impressed. It was the first time. That was in 1999. And as the internet grew, and as computers grew stronger, and as cell phones changed and worked in tandem with computers, everything started to change. Whereas in 1999, I would go to a payphone, make a phone call. Where was the number? In my head. Where was all my information? As we work our way into the 21st century, where is our information? Not here. It's from what I'm filming from right here. A cell phone. I can film and talk to you via the cell phone. It has been the center. It has become the center of our lives. It is the conduit to which we communicate. It's the conduit to which we receive information. It has somewhat become the mortar between the various blocks of life. Now this is good and it is bad. Because I will tell you, as personally as I do know phone numbers, but they're from 40 years ago. All the new phone numbers are in here. I don't know people's phone numbers anymore. When I'm confused about something, I used to run to a book and learn. Now I just go to the phone. So with all that being said, with computers and the internet and cell phones, we have a vast array of technologies that has done something very unique. It does the thinking for us. Therefore, very much like our imaginations when television came out, now our brains are taking a break. They're not working like they once did. They're not soaring to great heights like they once did. Sure, there are some that do. But I have always been under the impression that, like with a muscle, if you don't use it, it atrophies. Now, as I've been told by the scientists, they said it's because we're living longer. But is it possible, just an idea, is it possible because we're not using our brain so much that they're kind of withering away and dying? Not completely. But they're saying, well, you don't need me, so I'll just go take a vacation. That's this kind of scary thought, and I have thought about this a lot, and I have been told I am wrong consistently. But I wonder that perhaps in the future, perhaps some individual, some scientist in the future will finally sit there and say, we stopped using our brains, and we used everything else to garner our information, instead of trying to figure it out on our own. So this great advance of Alzheimer's, and it's a lot. There's a lot of people that are suffering from it. And it could have something to do with our diet. It could have something to do with medications. It could have something to do with our social structure. It could have something to do with so much. But I think it's an interesting thing to think of and pontificate over, if I may use that word, to maybe give yourself a break. Instead of using the cell phone to look something up, you look something up. Learn it. Use your mind. Expand your mind. Challenge your mind. Because I could be totally wrong. But what if I'm right? Think about that. Challenge your mind. Use it. Expand it. They used to say years ago, if you want to make your mind work better as you get older, learn another language. Well, there's a reason for it. Your brain needs exercise. So think about this. Just a thought on my mind, if you'll pardon the expression, as I wanted to talk about the lack of use of our minds in this present day, which is becoming somewhat epidemic. What do you think? Love to hear from you. Thank you.